All right, good morning, folks. So I know you're all here to talk about processing tomatoes. Exciting topic here in California. So how many, can someone tell me how many acres of processing tomato are grown here in California annually on average? Yeah, good. Trying to get a sense of how many folks are familiar with processing tomatoes here in California. So that crop in general, yes, we're going to be talking about mechanization. Yes, we know we're at an automation in ag conference here today. But to kind of anchor this panel, we're talking about processing tomatoes, 225,000, 250,000 acres of this crop. Still a specialty crop, still under 300,000 acres, about 250 to 280 growers here in the state from Bakersfield to around Chico every year here in California. About 25% to 30% of the global production of this crop, important crop, cornerstone row crop here in California. So we've got speaking of cornerstones, we've got three important people here today representing some important folks and institutions in the industry. Not speaking of myself, but I'm here representing the Research Commodity Board, so the California Tomato Research Institute. My name is Zach Bagley. Our job is to translate the research needs in the field, the grower needs in the field, to solutions by working with researchers, whether that's at UC Davis or through UC A&R with farm advisors at the county level, or at private or public institutions otherwise, to bring those solutions to growers in an applied way. We've also got Bruce Rominger here, Rominger Brothers Farms, Skeeter Bethia from Morningstar, the largest processing tomato operator globally. And we've got Patricia Lazisi representing UC A&R as a farm advisor out of the Sacramento Valley. So I'll let them each introduce themselves for a few minutes and talk about, kind of anchor this topic of automation. The last panel did a good job of describing automation is complicated. We're not going to get into all those complications. We're describing a case study of transplanting. So processing tomatoes has, in the last couple of years, jumped into transplanting with a couple of commercial options, really 3 to 4 commercial options, and we're going to talk about that today. So I want them to introduce themselves. I'll stop talking for a few minutes here and give Bruce the microphone first.
All right, well, thank you, Zach. I'm happy to be here. Yeah, my name is Bruce Rominger. I'm run a diversified row crop orchard operation here in Yolo County, kind of a medium-sized, that you might say, for this area. And so tomatoes is a very cornerstone crop in our rotation, but we have rice and a bunch of other field crops and walnuts and almonds also. And I have been probably experimented more than I should have in my career. I've got a lot of things that have flopped and a lot of crops that we've tried, and I haven't learned my lesson, but you know, at least I recognize it now at my advanced age that probably a few of those things were a direction I shouldn't have gone. However, in tomatoes is very critical to our operation, so I've always tried to keep up with what's the latest technology, what people are doing, what's out there. Ideally, I'd like to see some bigger operations, you know, do the experimentation, and then I can watch them and learn from it. But that doesn't always work, and so I like to try some things. And when this new agri-planter came out and was demoed here several years ago in the Sacramento Valley, I went and looked at it, and I just, you know, it was the first automated planter that I saw that I said, hey, I think this will work in my operation. And so we took the leap and bought one 2 years ago, and I haven't looked back from there. So very happy with it. We'll get into more details about it a little bit longer, but that's kind of my story, where I'm coming from.
There we go. I'm Skeeter Bethea, and I work with Morningstar in the south end of things, from Sacramento to Bakersfield, doing the planning and logistics. And I think what we're looking for out of this automation is more efficiency, less people to move logistically to place, and the ability to adapt in the weather gaps when we're missing days, and the ability to compensate and stay on time and in quality.
My name is Patricia Lazicki. I'm the Vegetable Crops Advisor for Yolo, Solano, and Sacramento counties. And this area, historically, big hub of the processing tomato industry, most important crop economically for a lot of the growers here. And working as a farm advisor with UC Cooperative Extension, kind of see my role as a bridge between university research and the growers, and basically to do applied research that provides the science that can then inform decisions about how to adapt to changing conditions. So increases in labor costs, did a cost study last year that showed increase of 50 to 60% between 2017 and 2023. So it's an increasing cost that's not going to go away. And then also, as Skeeter mentioned, where we have a changing climate, there's rhythms that might not necessarily work as well every year. Last year, for example, we had very, very late planting, which needed some more adaptability. So that's another reason I'm interested in automation, is providing diversification of options for those changing conditions.
So thank you all for those backgrounds. Continuing to kind of anchor this conversation around, what are we talking about when we talk about automation? I want to take us back a few years. Processing tomatoes were one of the first crops here in the valley to automate anything, to turn anything mechanical with mechanical harvesters. I'd like to hear from this group, probably more from Bruce than from others. What are some lessons learned from that automation, that mechanization from the processing tomato industry that you think we can take into the future of these next things, whether it's transplanting or cultivation or otherwise? What are those lessons from turning harvesting from something that was very labor intensive to something that was completely mechanized that we can use for the future?
Well, I think that the obvious lesson is you better constantly adapt. You better always look for new technology, or your industry won't exist. We wouldn't be growing tomatoes in this valley if we had to pay people $16.50 or $17 or $18 to hand pick them. So we would not have a tomato industry in this state if we wouldn't have developed the varieties and the tomato harvesters that could do this. So that's just not a lesson about, a history lesson. That's a lesson for going forward. We have to do the same things. We have some of the highest labor costs in the world. We all know that here. And so if we aren't always on the cutting edge of technology, we won't have a tomato industry 10 or 20 or 30 years from now. So that's the lesson in my mind. Yeah, there are hard bumps to go through when you do that. There certainly were political ones with the tomato harvester advance because it puts people out of work in that sense. But I think that's something that you can't look back like that. The lesson is you have to do these kind of things to survive.
So thank you for that, Bruce. To Skeeter and to Bruce, to both of you. So that was the past. Outside of transplanting, what's your automation focus today? For Bruce on the farm, for Skeeter, anything from the nursery, the grower side to the processing facility. What are you looking at? Not just transplanting, but otherwise to automate. Skeeter, as you said, take some of those labor challenges away.
We'll look at anything, right? Whatever, not everything is going to stick. You got to vet it out. But what you really see in the mechanization of it is, if you look at where it was today, then to where it is today, look at where it's come, right? And all the technology, it's an evolution. Where we're at today in the automation is a starting point, right? And you got to keep focused on the end goal. You got to try things, and the things that'll work will continue to increase, and the things that don't, you go back and learn from them to adapt in the next one. But you got to continually be looking for that. We're we got a grafting machine in the greenhouse. Nobody's grafted tomatoes for processing, but we have the ability to do that. And so we're looking at automation in a lot of different areas for a lot of different reasons, but all to get more units per person per hour to drive those costs out.
That's what it comes down to, the cost, ultimately. So where we're looking, you know, beyond the transplanting, obviously we're always looking at harvest technology. What can we do? You know, we have a harvester like a lot of people in the state now that doesn't have any sorters on it. So that was an advancement that's been around for a while. But that technology, the color sorting technology, that's going to keep advancing. You know, we need color sorters that can deal with mold and you know, other issues in the future. For my point of view, being a farmer out in the field, I'm looking at weed problems. I'm looking at, you know, the automated weeders, you know, the robotic weeders, things like that. We're always looking at the automation in the irrigation systems, basically to actually make the management easier. So one manager can handle more acres because you don't have to be there. You can remote sensing. That's going to be just more and more in our lives, in everything. And we're looking at those things as much as we can. I'm interested at this conference to look at, you know, what the weeding technology is, because that's a big expense in tomatoes.
Thank you both. So again, kind of anchoring us, we've only got about 20 minutes left. We want to give you all a chance. You know, you're taking your valuable time here to ask some questions at the end. So let's focus this down to automated transplanting, opening questions up to all of you. So Patricia, chime in as well. What makes transplanting number one on the list of in-field automation needs? What's the history of the industry in trying to solve this? You know, some background for me before you guys answer this question. I started in the role that I'm in today. I was in the industry before this, but before I even started, a grower that knew me in my former role called me and said, "Hey, I got to meet you," and told me, in this job, if you don't solve the transplanting problem as one of your first priorities, it's going to be an issue for you because this is one of our biggest problems. So that was 7+ years ago. This has been a big problem for processing tomatoes from a labor perspective for a long time. So the three of you, go for it.
Go ahead. You want me? Well, okay. I mean, you just said it. It's a labor perspective. In my operation, which is not a real large processing tomato operation, I had basically 30 people out in the field all spring. You know, 30 people, 3 transplanters, you know, also the forklifts and the water trucks and all that other stuff. Now I'm at 1 tractor, 1 transplanter, 3 people. Massive difference. And it's mostly about cost of labor, but it's also management. It's much easier to manage 3 people than it is 30. You know, they show up to work, more likely to have everybody there. You know, when you have 30 people, somebody's sick, somebody may get injured, you have people go in different directions, the wrong direction, unfortunately, quite often. So 3 people is much easier from a management point of view. And so now I can do more acres with 3 people and 1 transplanter than I could do with 30. Much less management, much fewer headaches. So that's the main point that I want to make is, for me, it's about money, but it's also about management and being able to operate your operation with fewer managers also.
Times that by a lot. So in the South, we're going to plant somewhere around 40,000 acres of tomatoes this year, and so you got all those pieces, and when you can shrink it down, you know, they teach you in baseball and self-defense that the tighter you keep your center mass, the faster you can rotate. And so when you lose all those peripheral seasonal people down to your real full-time employees, you can maneuver and adapt much faster than what we're able to in the big sense when we need all those people.
One thing I'll add, I'm not in the field doing it, so I'm not one of the experts here, but last year was my first year on the job, and again, very late planting year, and I ran into people who were having some issues getting the labor that they needed because planting was now running into the cherry harvest. And that had me thinking about kind of these, in California, we're not just growing 1 or 2 crops. We've got a lot of intersecting cycles, a lot of demand for seasonal labor, And as our seasons get less and less predictable, then that's going to be an issue that's going to become more and more of an issue. So based on my 1 year of experience, that was something that, seemed as something to be thinking about for the future.
Yeah, one thing I'll add that she touched on a little bit is labor availability. I personally have been able in the last few years to get those 30 people, but I know that's an issue in California, and it's going to be more of an issue going forward. So that's also part of it, just having them available. You know, it's tough when you're down 2 or 3 people. That's a whole transplanter you'd have to park and wouldn't be able to operate. So 3 people is a wonderful thing to manage compared to 30.
Would you say, and I would caveat, Patricia, we're going to get into some of the work that you've done in the last year with your study side by side with these transplanters in a minute. So not the experience. I would caveat it with you've done a significant work in the last year side by side, looking at these transplanters and comparing them as a case study. We'll get into that, but focusing down on the use of these so far. Labor savings, yes. Logistical, less of a headache. I'm hearing yes on that one. Do you feel you're giving anything up on the quality side? In processing tomatoes, yes, we're a commodity, but of course there are specs, and we're looking for quality on the processed product at the end of the day. Are we giving anything up in the field? You know, what you're looking at for what you're getting paid for, or what you're looking at as a processor, Skeeter, at the end of the day?
Well, I was very concerned about that, going to an automated planter. What is the quality of the planting job going to be? You know, theoretically, with people on a hand planter, they can adjust the planting according to the height of the plant and get the depth correct all the time. Reality is they don't. And so, and this automated planter I'm using does not have as much flexibility. I was concerned about having plants up in the air and everything, but my yields have been at or above my historical average the last 2 years. So quality-wise, and you know, Patricia can talk about the trials she's done and everything, but that was my main concern. And don't get the idea that we've solved the automated planting issue, because this needs to evolve. They can get better. They can have more adjustments, more flexibility. You know, more automation, more sensors on them so they can adjust to the height of the plants, the transplants you're getting from the greenhouse. There's a lot to be done to even improve them more. So we shouldn't think like we solved that problem, Zach. So don't go to, you know, pat yourself on the back and think you're done. So we need to keep working on these, and they need to evolve as we go forward also.
So on the processing side, we haven't seen anything that says that this transplanter is going to give us a reduction in yield, and your data has supported that. But the principles that you apply for the quality of that job, they never change. It doesn't matter if you're a finger planter or a carousel planter. The principles of getting that plant in, getting a good seal, and getting the moisture to meet the subsurface moisture until they can get the water back up, it still never changes. But at those speeds, the skips and the things can be a real problem. So the advancing technology in camera and sensing skips and those kind of things so that at those speeds, you get alarms that'll shut you down and go back and get those plants in. Those kind of little details will make it better, but the principles in that application across a wide range of soils and all these different variables has been a real challenge to get it. You're not going to get the speeds at every single field condition, but it's keeping that quality at the forefront and doing the job, and then figuring out how to go faster later.
Anything you all have been surprised by on the positive side when you've moved, outside of labor savings, outside of, hey, yield is same, quality is the same, anything else there?
Well, I've always been a somewhat early grower on the schedule side in the Sacramento Valley. I'm over on the west side, a little more heat than out here in the central, so my contracts are on the early end, so I was always a double row planter. I've had double row tomatoes for 30 years or whatever, for many years, and so going to this automated planter, my only option was single row. So I was very concerned about that, how that would work as far as my yields, but once again, like I said, I've been very consistent in my yields, and I'm not looking back. I'm not going back to finger planters.
For me, I've been surprised by the adaptability. You can program those planters like you to plant any conditions, but it's learning to make that adjustment to get there. And so that slows you down in the learning part, but the machine itself is, all of them have been really adaptable to those conditions. It's just getting the experience to make those adjustments.
Last question before we get to kind of Patricia's study and asking a few questions about that. But to the two of you, we've got a handful of processing tomato growers in the room here. What if they're kind of on the fence? We're thinking about this. We're still using carousel, finger planters. Maybe we're considering that leap. What advice would you give to them their first year as they're making that transition?
Well, it'd be better for me if nobody else converted, so then I'd have an advantage. But no, I'm, joking aside, you have to learn how to use these things. You don't just put it in the field and say, hey, good luck, guys. You have to learn how to do it. Like he was talking about, there's a lot of adjustments. There's a lot of knowledge. You need somebody on that machine that I have, the AgriPlanter, that becomes very knowledgeable of the parameters that you can adjust on that. And so it's not something you just start and walk away. It's something you watch, but you're managing a machine more and the settings on that machine more than the people. So it is a learning curve. It takes a while. I think after 2 years, we're still going to improve it this year. We have things we just, after looking at our stands and looking at everything, to say, okay, we got to work on this. We got to work on this. We got to watch this closer. But like Skeeter said, with cameras and different things like that, to watch it closer, I think we're going to keep advancing.
Same deal on our side, but I think that I've done a lot of automation in nursery settings and other situations, and you're never coming out of the box at hitting the targets, and so that evolution to actually getting that and getting people technically trained in position is a transition in total, and it's a 2-year investment when you're only getting one turn. If you were planting all year round, maybe you get that guy there in a year, but I do think 2 years is way more realistic than 6 months.
All right, Patricia, I keep saying we're going to come back to you. It's your time to shine here. What specific transplanting automation technologies have you studied in tomato fields in these last couple of years? Official study, the last 4 or 5, 6 months, you did do some work in your first year 2 years ago. From your perspective, what's driving the adoption of these technologies?
What's driving the adoption is what we've been talking about, labor. And people also, every time I've been out in the field planting one of these trials, there's neighbors there watching. So I think seeing how they work on other people's fields, combination of there's the need, there's a potential solution. So just from talking to folks, that's probably what's driving it. Do you want me to talk a little bit about the study?
Yeah, please.
I was approached at a meeting by a grower who does custom planting for other growers and said, there's a question I need you to answer for me. You look at the stand as the AgriPlanter plants. Doesn't look like it's necessarily as good as the finger planter. Does this have an effect on the ultimate yields? So I designed a randomized controlled study, a side-by-side trial of, in the first year, it was kind of a pilot study. I did the AgriPlanter, a finger planter, and a carousel planter with 3 replicates on the same field. And then this year, I repeated the study with 3 different growers on 3 different fields, just to ask, are we actually seeing more skips? How big are they? Do we see consistent differences in the planting depth? How's the stand establishment? In the same field, in the same year, can we see a difference between these in how they perform agronomically and in the yield? So these were big trials. These growers that I worked with were very generous, put a lot of trust. These are like at least 15, 20 acre trials, and ultimately did not see any difference between how they performed in yields The automated planters did have more skips. I tested this year 2 automated planters, the Agri planter, which is the one that Bruce and a couple other folks in this area are using, and then a Ferrari Futura that is being used a bit down south. And with all of those, I did see there's kind of a correlation between the faster it goes, the more skips you see, but they tended to be pretty small. And in the end, it did not appear to have any effect on yield. One thing that I did see was there was much, much more variability in the yields within a field than you would get from the variability between the planters. So this year we had pretty decent planting conditions. The weather in all of them ended up being pretty nice, and the transplants were pretty good quality. So whether I can extrapolate that to if you're planting at 115 degrees on a slope, that's another question. But I think our results from this year show there doesn't seem to, and back up what the growers who have been using them have also been seeing, is that there doesn't seem to be an intrinsic yield penalty.
And that
with
work,
these planters we tested.
yeah, with the planters that Patricia tested, that work funded by, through Patricia, through UCANR, funded by the growers of the industry, and Patricia's turnaround time, incredible. That's already published on the CTRI website, so you can Google that and find that if you're interested in that study. It's already up on the website. So few more questions for all of you. What do you think? There's a lot of manufacturers in the room of different kinds of equipment. What do you think these manufacturers could be doing a better job of as they build, sell, service this equipment in the processing tomato space?
On my side, when I've had to manage a lot of different automated, they're all in their own software, and you have to go this panel to that panel. You have to switch back and forth, and there's no roll up where you're just like got all your information in one place. And to me, in the back end is the end user isn't only using that single product, and the ability to link those things together and have a single source dashboard, or at least different visions of your irrigation and your work that's being automated. Those kind of things I think are big advancements coming on the back end. And those are things that I would look forward to. But that the use of that software, how adaptable it is. You can't go to Excel for everything, or you wind up. My naming system sucks, so I lose all those files. That single dashboard to make quick decisions where everybody's sharing the same information. All that stuff's critical to the efficacy of what we're using.
Yeah, and I'll echo that a little bit as being a smaller farmer where I'm in my office, in the field, talking to every employee pretty much every day. It is overwhelming sometimes when you get the diversity of products that are thrown your way. Between all the different irrigation sensoring stuff, the tomato harvester stuff, the new technology, the fertility stuff, there's so many of these biologicals out there. Assessing that information is very difficult as an individual grower who's trying to farm every day and do that. So, that's where we need help from people like Patricia, CTRI, to run these kind of trials and find out, separate the wheat from the chaff on a lot of these products, because it can be really overwhelming trying to figure out which direction I should go. I mean, how many companies are out there telling you how to automate and, your irrigation sensing equipment, and which ones have the best software? Which one do you want to go with? You might not know and pick the wrong one, and then you're down a dead end, and they might not be in business. And so it's difficult as a single proprietor to try and separate this stuff and figure out which way to go. So I like to look at, like I said earlier, bigger operators trying this stuff, researchers doing this stuff, looking at it to help some of our somewhat smaller growers to figure out which is the best direction to go in this technology. We know we need to get there. Which road do you start down?
You took the words out of my mouth with, I think one piece of advice is, this is one of our purposes as farm advisors, is to trial technologies to support decisions by the growers. So We really like to work with companies, and especially through the commodity boards, they're going to be the ones who know what the industry needs, knowing people who might be interested in this particular type of technology, who may be able to give advice on this part isn't ready yet. You may want to work more on that before we start doing hardcore field trials. So yeah, working through commodity boards, cooperative extension, it's been, I guess, productive in this case. And then guess one other thing that really impressed me with when I was working with the AgriPlanter that I think has contributed to some of its success in this area. I was working with a grower who it was his first year using it, and I was just monitoring how well it was doing on the fields, and there were 200-foot skips. And it was pretty consistent. He was having to plant at night. He had to replant quite a bit, and I was thinking, oh man, this guy is not going to be a fan of how this machine is doing. I was talking to him about kind of his issues. He was actually very happy with it, and had specific ideas for why these things went wrong, how they could be better. I was talking with the manufacturer later, and he had mentioned he'd been consistently working with this grower on these issues, and it was informing changes that they were going to make to the machine. And so I guess the lesson there is what's been repeated here a few times is continuously working with the people on the ground for years and over different types of conditions. One year is a lot different from the other, and monitoring how it can be better, where the friction is, and yeah, keeping that relationship.
So Patricia, I've just heard from you kind of keyword relationships. We heard at the end of the last panel, working directly with growers, really important. A lot of the audience in this room, manufacturers, investors, researchers, retailers. How do we connect with the grower audience? These relationships are important directly with growers and the folks that talk to them regularly. So Bruce, you've said we've taken care of the automated transplanter problem, right?
No.
Yeah. There are still a lot of things to work on. What's the next priority? We'll continue to work on that. What's the next biggest thing in processing tomatoes?
All right.
From an automation standpoint.
I'll tell you my opinion on that in a second. Reiterate what she said is about the support and the adaptability, because I do have the AgriPlanter. I've had the principals and the engineers from Europe that built it and designed it in my field looking at it. This company that supports it here in the United States, Puler Ag, out of Ohio, they've been in my field repeatedly. So they are already, it's been out here a couple years, they are doing design changes constantly based on the conditions and the things we see. So that company has supported us very well. Like I mentioned earlier, automation for me, I need to see robotic weeders in my field pretty soon. That's a big issue. That's a lot of money we spend. There's a different weed every few years is coming and becomes the problem. So, and that's going to be something that's going to ongoing forever. Just like weeds are going to figure out how to become resistant to herbicides, they're going to figure out how to grow and be resistant to a robotic weeder in a way too. As far as their structure or whatever. So we're going to have to constantly work on that. But I'm interested to see what's here at this show. But that's really what I'm looking at down the road, to try and get the people out of the field weeding, get rid of some of the herbicides that don't work on some of the weeds anyway.
For me, it's that innovation on the backside and the dashboard and the ability to manage on the fly. And, with all the different pieces within our company, that central source information keeps us all on the same page. So I think there's a lot of, and you see it here, it's amazing to see it all in one place, all the different things that you could use, but if you're realizing that you're pigeonholing that information into separate places, you're less likely to want to jump until you know that you can bring that into central source.
All right. We've got 4 minutes. One person with a 4-minute question, or 4 people. Yeah.
Impromptu question based on, prompted by your conversation about, I think it's your conversation, about different dashboards and what have you. From a user purchaser standpoint, would you have an interest if there was a farm management software platform that was built, kind of an umbrella, that might be able to link or have
the same, right? Where everybody on my team or on the team that I'm on would have that same view. And here's that base information where the operators in the field executing may have a little bit different dashboard, but still the same type of information because they have a different application of that. But that's the deal. I worked at companies where you had 6 different softwares that you were working in, from climate management to equipment to all these different things. And when you're shuffling back and forth, the next person in the door's got a question on the one that you flip back to and you can't find, and you were just in. And it just creates a lot of chaos, and sometimes that data is not fully true. So all that matters in there, but the efficiencies for the people in the seat making those decisions in one single source, that's critical.
I'm wondering, in the trials that you did looking at the different planters, was there any economic analysis done? Because, if you're getting skipping and you have to go back and add additional labor to backfill that, like sometimes that can make a big impact on the economics of running one of those machines. So I'm wondering, has that been done as part of the study?
It's in the works, yes.
Okay.
It's being done as we speak, but a lot of people don't have their end of the year data until the end of the year, so.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Great
not
question.
presenting that yet, but yes, that's part of our generously funded by CTRI project.
Flannel.
So Bruce, you mentioned the genetic advances help the harvesting of the uniformity of maturity. Are there genetics that we need to help accelerate future automation needs in the process?
Well, you could breed a tomato that never molds. I mean, certainly, the genetic breeding programs are very active, and numerous companies, and I'm sure they're trying on all these things all the time. Obviously, the canneries need color, they need quality, they need, the solids, all those things we need to work on. As far as like genetics that would help with weeding or something like that, I haven't seen anybody come up with a Roundup Ready tomato that's not genetically modified. So I don't see that coming down the road. But obviously, if you could have a tomato that was resistant to some herbicides, or develop a new herbicide that, that's even more selective. Oh, sorry about that. Which even more selective for a certain characteristic of a tomato plant that could survive it, and the nut grass or the whatever would not survive it. There's always that work to be done. But I see that's pretty active right now, but it needs to continue, of course, as part of the puzzle.
I got a really quick one. It's not a question, actually. It's a compliment. This industry is extremely well served by Zach. Zach, I came to during the pandemic when we were all locked down, and I wanted to demonstrate a technology. And I don't know if you remember when we met in the parking lot of an elementary school because it was closed.
Yeah, the Spring Lake Owls. Yeah.
I just really want to compliment. I think it's really, you do a really great job in this industry, Zach.
Thank you. Yep.
This question for Steve. 10 years ago, Susan funded an automated command center. Now it's relatively advanced. Is there think about bringing that back?
Not that particular model, and it gave our guys a false sense of their ability to adapt that automation. But that was kind of a dead-end road. I think Iron Tree has their own stuff that we're looking at, and similar to that, as we keep a broad look at all these things that are coming in from this area. But the one that we were working on originally, I think that one is parked out there in the graveyard somewhere.
All right. Yeah. Last question here.
Is there any value to remote sensing for weed or disease outbreaks, like any drone technologies that can identify a bloom rate popping up or some virus outbreak? Is there any demand for that?
I think there's a demand for better and clear information and what those challenges are out there as you go into harvest, or those extra things that we got to do because we know it's there. The more we know, the more we can bring in, the easier it is to gather that information across fewer people, the more useful it is. And if it just starts there and then you're identifying other things along the way that we can build on, definitely there's a place for that.
Yeah, we do purchase some aerial sensing, stuff where we're getting photos of our different field periodically during the season. And there are times when you can see outbreaks of things. Certainly if you let your mites get out of hand, you can see it. So we hopefully it doesn't get that far. But yeah, there's certainly a demand for that. The more precise, the better.
All right. Appreciation for the panel. And thanks to everybody here for your time and attention.